Today I'm going to try to draw this bicycle in Tallinn, Estonia, and I'm starting painfully slow by marking a few of these imperceptible dots. The reason I'm making these little dots is to roughly work out the ratio of the wheels to the space between them. I may not be very accurate, but I figured that space in the middle was about 2/3 the size of each wheel. My intention is to use these markings to keep everything anchored as I make my way through the drawing, but I'm not necessarily locked into them, as you'll see. These are just for the purpose of locking down a simple idea of where things are going to generally sit on the paper. Also, as I hinted at, I'm sorry you can't really see anything just yet. Not much to be done about that, unfortunately. Anyway, I'm also plotting some points to better understand the whole shape of the wheels, among other things. Drawing circles is hard, so I'm making it a little easier on myself by marking the midpoint of the two dots for each wheel respectively, and then taking that radius and turning it 90 degrees, applying it vertically. And that'll give me like a cross shape, which could be made into a square, which I could then more easily make into a circle. It's an overly complicated method, which will ideally create a more symmetrical and circular circle. I go through a few stages with these wheels, but I guess we'll see where they end up by the end. Anyway, while I test the waters with these initial shapes, I want to talk about my intentions with this drawing. The other day, I mentioned seeking out more single subject references, and this is one of such references. The bicycle itself is everything to me here, and if I don't get to the setting at all, not a problem. By the end, I do offer a slight suggestion as to the components of the environment, but like I said, they're slight. My plan today is to hyperfixate on the proportions of this bicycle, hopefully making my way into some of the smaller details along the way, and generally just attempting to do the best I can to reproduce it on the paper. Keep in mind, this is real life. I'm not copying a photo or someone else's drawing, so interpreting a scene like this at my level comes with its fair share of wonky mistakes, but I'd say that's enough qualifying. What I'm trying to say is that today I'm doing everything I possibly can to get this bike into my sketchbook, and that's it. So, something I caught myself doing a lot here was double and sometimes triple, and if we're honest, quadruple checking the reference. Anytime I was about to make a line or something, I wanted to ensure I wasn't about to make an irreversible mistake. Since I really wanted this drawing to be as accurate as I could manage, I didn't want to ruin it with any easily avoidable accidents. So, not only did I take my time, you're watching this video at 1.5 speed and the drawing time was around 20 minutes, I'm also consistently looking up and down. I'm observing the subject as much as I possibly can, trying to ascertain exactly where things go and everything's relationship to everything else. This had me feeling pretty hesitant in the beginning, but I think I was able to relax more and more as time went on. Around this point, the general shape of the bike is starting to emerge, so I didn't need to be so nervous about any big blunders. Even though the wheels look bent out of shape, and there still aren't really any details, because I'm seeing what looks like a bike, I'm already feeling pretty optimistic. Even at this stage, compared to the only other bicycle I've ever drawn in my whole life, the one from Krakow, which you should go watch when you're done here. I think it serves as evidence of my progress. This one is vastly superior, at least in my opinion. Granted, that other one wasn't set up as like head on as the one we have here, but still, today I'm able to understand these angles much better, and since I've given myself some extra time with the details and whatnot, it will ultimately look much more realistic, thankfully. That being said, this bicycle, along with many, if not all of my drawings, feels wooden. Like it's just off enough to be anything but actually realistic. And it's funny how that happens. And by that, I mean how, like, priorities change. I'm obviously still very much a beginner by every conceivable metric, but even within my own specific personal position on the path of progression, that's a mouthful. Like from my little bubble, there are these echoes of things I'll eventually have to concern myself with, things that sit way off in the distance, but I don't know, like the faintest sounds are just beginning to make their way to me. So, for example, and you'll need one if you're ever going to understand all of what I just said, something seeming wooden or a little uncanny or something like that, that is something I feel like I can't be bothered to address just yet. But the fact that it's making its presence known is really interesting to me. Not because I deeply care about fixing that particular problem or anything, but because I'm so curious to see what else is coming around the bend, especially of which I'm currently ignorant. Like, let's say over the next few months, I do finally approach this whole woodenness problem and I face it and overcome it, hopefully. While I'm dealing with that, among other things, surely, I wonder what echoes I'll be hearing then. Like right now, I'm just thinking about composition of scenes, proportion, understanding perspective, that kind of stuff. And if I really ran through the list, like to add everything I can think of, I'd say shading, different lighting conditions, people's faces, people's hands, literally every single thing about a person, depth, obviously. And then I don't know, somewhere way at the bottom, like barely on my radar, would be gesture, which I guess would help me solve the wooden problem. It's barely something I've even ever heard of. Those are only the things I can think of. And I'm sure there are at least 100 other things that I'm unaware of and unprepared for. While that is kind of daunting to consider, it's honestly really interesting to me as well. It's funny, I tend to have a lot of this macro, like long game patience, but in the moment, it's the opposite. While I'm doing the thing, in this case drawing, I have this intense impatience with myself. I know it's in my head, like what I want to reproduce onto the paper, but as it flows out of me, I'm thinking about how much better I think I could be doing, which I know sounds insane. And yet, when I'm thinking about the overall process of learning on a much longer timeline, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get there. I wonder what that says about me. Impatient in the moment, unsatisfied with the individual steps, but willing and happy to keep taking those steps. Does that just make me a masochist? Let me know in the comments. But yeah, I just find that whole concept really interesting. And it really hits me when I finish a drawing and immediately think I could do it better, almost as if someone else came over and drew it before me. But obviously I'm wrong, because this is what I'm capable of. The drawing you're seeing materialize right now is exactly what I'm capable of. But some almost definitely broken part of my head sees it and thinks, well, I'll be better than that pretty soon. And I don't know, I find it amusing. It's pretty ironic. And above all, I just feel lucky to be deluded enough to be so attracted to the future that I'll just deal with the present. I've said it before, but these are the kinds of things I wasn't expecting to find along my process, but I'm glad I am. This whole project isn't just about the drawing, but about the process itself, and I'm learning a lot either way. Notably that I'm a masochist, apparently. But anyway, as you can see, I've made my way into the smaller details of the bicycle, and this is the fun part for me. I only wish it had a dozen more little doodads clipped onto it so I could like squiggle them all in. You'll notice that there are still some slight proportional problems, but I'm not sure how to fix those. The only way I know how to draw something like this is piece by piece. So while I'm glad I plotted those points for the wheels, I realize a lot can happen from the beginning to end. Small mistakes can domino their way up to big ones, and accounting for them is hard. Actually, it feels impossible for me. I'm in a different world when doing these drawings, and losing the forest for the trees is practically my MO. Regardless, even though plenty of these little things are kind of off here, it's turning out to be a much better representation of a bicycle than my last one, so I'll take it. Also, this is a small thing that I noticed, so maybe you did too, but I almost drew in all of the spokes, which is something I very much winged. I don't know what the pattern of spokes is, but maybe I'll learn one day. But I almost drew them directly from the tire to the hub without including the rim. And I only mention it because it's a decent example of the double checking I mentioned earlier. Would it have been the biggest mistake in the world? No. Would it have ruined the drawing? Of course not. But it just goes to show how quickly something could go wrong if I'm not paying attention. I obviously got a little lost in the drawing rather than focusing on the reference, but I'm glad I referred back to the bike before committing. Speaking of committing, and what a segue this will be. Why have you not committed to this YouTube channel? You're here, you're watching this video. I almost used a bunch of superlatives, but this is a channel of honesty. But what gives? Why haven't you subscribed? Everyone else is doing it, and that's all that really matters. Just commit for once in your life. I dare you. But seriously, thank you so much to everyone who's here watching. This project has been immensely fulfilling, and I really couldn't do it without you. The drawing is obviously a big part of why I do this, but the video making is significant as well. And I've enjoyed making these and sharing them a lot more than I ever expected to. So yeah, if you're already subscribed, awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't yet, don't worry, I'll prove my worth eventually. You'll see. Okay, before we finish up, I wanted to ask you for any suggestions you might have regarding learning about art. So obviously I've spoken a lot about learning tips and techniques here on YouTube, and obviously this practice is its own process of learning, but I'd like to learn more about art in general. Some examples. I'd like to have a better understanding of art history. I'd like to have a broader knowledge of and appreciation for different styles and periods of art. I'd like to read books about various conceptual takes about art. I don't want to overwhelm myself necessarily, which is something I'd like to dig into in a future video, but I do want to build up some of these resources. I've made it a habit to blatantly admit my ignorance in numerous ways, might I add, but I'd like to, chip away at that. I'd like to learn all that I can, not just in the practice of the art, but the theory and history and all that jazz. So if you have any suggestions for me, not just about drawing, but about art in the broadest or most specific sense, let me know in the comments. Hey, so here we have it, a bicycle. And you know what? As opposed to yesterday's art crime, at least you can tell what this one is. Honestly, I'm pretty pleased with this one. I'm really glad I took my time with it. The proportions ended up fairly decent, and, things are sharp and decisive, and I like that. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, along with all that other stuff I asked for. I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.